The dying star cast a crimson glow across the bridge of the Zyphar Dominion's War Council chamber, its light reflecting off the obsidian metal of the chamber walls. A vast holographic display flickered at the center of the room, projecting a rotating image of a small, blue planet, Earth. To the Zyphar, it was nothing, a primitive world, a resource-rich rock floating in space, filled with fragile beings who should have collapsed at the first sign of war. And yet, something about this invasion felt different. But Admiral Korr'Vex did not believe in ghost stories. The Zernath? Fools. Weaklings. Incompetents. They had let a backwater planet defy them, their mighty general humiliated. But the Zyphar were not the Zernath, and Korr'Vex was not a general prone to failure. The council chamber buzzed with tension, filled with high-ranking officers, war strategists, and battle-hardened admirals. Rocket Supreme Strategist Tylis R.A., cloaked in regal black war robes, stood with her arms crossed, her sharp red eyes fixed on the holographic display. Rocket War Analyst Dravkor, an older, more calculating officer, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully, adjusting the tactical reports streaming before him. At the head of the chamber, Admiral Korr'Vex stood, his 6-foot-tall frame draped in dark metallic armor, his scars from previous wars etched like trophies across his reptilian skin. He turned to his council, his voice measured, yet heavy with authority. The Zernath were arrogant, blind. They mistook resistance for weakness. They did not finish the war. His eyes narrowed, scanning the faces before him. We will not make the same mistake. A murmur of approval rippled through the room, but Tylis R.A. did not smile. She flicked her claws across a floating display, bringing up the battle reports from the Zernath war logs. They had superior weapons. They had more numbers. And yet, they lost. Her voice was calm, clinical. You say we will not make the same mistake. Then tell me, Admiral, what mistake did they make? Korr'Vex snarled, waving a dismissive claw. They lacked discipline. They fought like beasts. He gestured toward the vast fleet waiting in orbit, ships stacked in perfect formations, hovering like silent war gods. We are different. We are precise. We do not rely on brute force. We control the battlefield before the enemy can even raise a weapon. Dravkor, who had remained silent, now stepped forward, his voice softer, but carrying a weight the others could not ignore. Yet you do not deny that they lost. Silence. Korr'Vex's jaw tightened, but he did not answer, because there was no answer. The Zernath had lost to an enemy that should have never been a threat. And now, it was his turn to face them. The Zyphar Dominion was not taking chances. Unlike the Zernath, who had underestimated humanity, the Zyphar had arrived in full force. 150 capital warships, each larger than Earth's greatest cities. 2,000 dreadnoughts, armed with plasma cannons capable of splitting planets. 100,000 fighter squadrons trained for planetary decimation. EMP satellites to wipe out communications. Troop carriers holding over 10 million ground units, ready to storm the surface. This was not a war fleet. This was a declaration of extinction, and Admiral Korr'Vex would make sure that Earth was erased from history. As he surveyed the fleet through the massive windows of the war chamber, he allowed himself a small smirk. When the Zernath arrived, Earth fought. He turned to his commanders. They will not have the chance to fight this time. The order was given. All fleets proceed to Earth. Initiate planetary lockdown. The colossal warships surged forward, their engines roaring, breaking through the silent abyss of space as they descended toward the pale blue world below. Their weapons charged, their landing forces ready. Korr'Vex took one final glance at the planet from his command chair, his mind already envisioning the conquest to come. A dead world, another victory, another species forgotten. But then something changed. As the fleet entered orbit, scanning the surface for military installations, power grids, and enemy resistance. They found nothing. No weapons were firing up at them. No aircraft scrambled. No human radio signals screamed in panic. There was no resistance at all. Korr'Vex leaned forward, his mandibles twitching in confusion. Where are their defenses? Tylis Array's fingers danced across the command console, scanning multiple frequencies. No military response. No power surges. Their defenses should be activating, but they aren't. Korr'Vex's eyes narrowed. Why? Silence. And then Dravkor, the oldest and most experienced among them, exhaled sharply. Something isn't right. Korr'Vex's claws tapped against his armrest, his unease growing by the second. Launch the drop troops. I want boots on the ground. Now, aboard the thousands of troop carriers, Zyphar warriors prepared for war, their weapons humming, their armor glinting in the red glow of their warships' interiors. The hatches opened, and the first wave of ground forces descended toward Earth's surface. The storm of invasion had begun. But as Admiral Korr'Vex watched from above, the unease in his chest never faded. Because deep in his core, he knew something was waiting for them, something they could not see. And whatever it was, it had been expecting them. The Zyphar war fleet hung in Earth's orbit, their colossal dreadnoughts casting monstrous shadows over the blue world below. Admiral Korr'Vex stood on the command deck, his golden eyes narrowed in suspicion. The invasion had begun. The ground forces had landed. But there was no war, no sirens, no counterattacks, no scrambling aircraft or planetary defenses. Nothing. This was not how a planetary conquest was supposed to start. And for the first time, Korr'Vex felt uneasy. Initial scans report no human military resistance. Admiral. Tylis Array's voice wavered slightly, something that never happened. She was the Dominion's greatest war strategist, a woman who had orchestrated the destruction of entire species. But now she was confused, and that made everyone else nervous. Impossible, Korr'Vex snarled, pacing toward the holographic display. They had armies during the Zernath War. Where are they now? Dravkor, the war analyst, silently tapped into the fleet's deep scan sensors. Then he froze. His mandibles twitched in hesitation, his fingers hesitating above the console as the data flooded his screen. Admiral, this is not right. The war room fell silent. What is it? Korr'Vex demanded. Dravkor turned, his face grim. There are no power sources. The words hung in the air, sinking into every officer's mind like poison seeping through steel. Korr'Vex's eyes narrowed in confusion. Clarify. Dravkor exhaled, his fingers tightening into fists. No active power grids. No running vehicles. No operational defense systems. Not even civilian infrastructure. Korr'Vex's claws dug into the command console. Are you telling me that an entire planetary civilization just shut itself off? Dravkor hesitated, and that hesitation sent a cold shiver through the command deck. Not shut off. It's like they were never here. Tylis Array zoomed into the war map, scanning through major cities. New York, empty. London, abandoned. Tokyo, silent. Entire skyscrapers stood intact, their windows reflecting the golden sunlight, but there were no people. No rushing workers, no civilians screaming, no vehicles moving along the streets. It was as if the entire human species had simply disappeared. And that was not possible. Send in more ground units. I want this planet torn apart if we have to. Korr'Vex's order echoed through the bridge. But even as he spoke, something felt wrong. There was no resistance. Not even a trap. There was only silence. Then, a proximity alarm blared. We're losing communication with 4 warships, an officer shouted, his hands flying over his console. Korr'Vex's head snapped toward him. What? How? The officer's eyes darted across the screens, his face turning pale. Their signals, they just vanished. 1 second they were there, the next gone. Tylis Array's mandibles clicked sharply, her voice dangerously low. Vanished? Ships that size do not just disappear. Dravkor's fingers danced over the radar, trying to track the missing warships. The screens glitched. The data warped. One by one, more warships began disappearing from the scanners. No explosions. No distress calls. Just gone. More alarms blared across the war room. Fleet reports incoming transmissions. Admiral. Korr'Vex's claws tightened. From where? The officer's hands trembled over the console, his voice barely above a whisper. Everywhere. The entire Zyphar war fleet was being flooded with dozens of incoming messages, but they were wrong. Each message had a different origin. One from deep space, another from beneath the oceans, another from inside their own warships. That was impossible. Decrypt the messages. Play them. The officer obeyed, and across the bridge, the first transmission played. Static. A voice, distant, distorted. You shouldn't have come here. Then, another transmission. A different voice. Whispering. You were warned. Then another. Now it's too late. Korr'Vex's skin crawled. These weren't threats. These weren't pleas for mercy. These were warnings. And for the first time, Korr'Vex felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Fear. As the ghost signals intensified, a final transmission came through, overriding all fleet communications. This time, only one voice spoke. It was clear, calm, human, and it was addressing him directly. Admiral Korr'Vex. Korr'Vex's breath hitched. "Who are you?" he demanded. The voice did not answer. Instead, it simply said, "You came for war, but war isn't what you'll find." A pause. Then, one final warning. "You should have left us alone." And then, the fleet went dark. Every ship, every screen, every power source. Dead silence. Admiral Korr'Vex was trapped. And the war had only just begun. The skies over Earth were silent. The Zyphar fleet, the largest invasion force ever assembled, hovered in low orbit, its once unbreakable communication grid severed. Admiral Korr'Vex stood at the bridge of his warship, his claws digging into the metal railing as he watched his ground forces descend toward the planet's surface. They were entering a battlefield with no enemy. No defenses, no resistance, no civilians, just emptiness. And that terrified him more than any war ever had. Thousands of Zyphar drop pods streaked through the sky, piercing through Earth's upper atmosphere, leaving trails of red-hot fire behind them. Each pod carried an elite war squad, armed with plasma rifles, kinetic shielding, and exosuits designed for planetary domination. This was no simple scouting mission. This was an invasion force meant to crush anything in its path. But as the first squads landed in the ruins of Earth cities, something felt wrong immediately. There was no gunfire, no panic, no human resistance running to hide. The soldiers moved out, yet the silence only deepened. The entire planet felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. But there was nothing here, or so they thought. The first squads pushed forward, moving through the lifeless streets of Earth's greatest cities. New York City. Skyscrapers stood untouched, their glass windows reflecting the fiery sky above. Tokyo. Neon signs flickered, casting an eerie glow on the empty streets. London. The Thames flowed peacefully, but no boats, no people, no sound. It was as if the world had been frozen in time, like someone had pressed pause on an entire civilization. A Zyphar squad leader, Captain Vrektor, marched down an abandoned highway, his visor scanning for heat signatures. "Nothing. This planet is dead," one of his soldiers muttered over comms. "Then where are the bodies?" another asked. That was when the first soldier disappeared. "Squad formation, check in." Captain Vrektor barked, snapping his rifle up. No response. He turned. One of his men was gone. Not dead. Not injured. Gone. The soldier had been there a second ago, standing right next to him, scanning the area, and now, he simply wasn't there anymore. No disturbance in the ground. No sound of struggle. No blood. Just emptiness where he once stood. Squad member TYRN is missing. Impossible. He was. Then, another soldier vanished. No escrime. No struggle. The air shimmered for half a second, like a heat wave rippling through reality itself. And then another trooper was gone. The remaining squad members spun in all directions, their rifles scanning the buildings, the streets, the skies. But there was nothing there. What the hell is happening? Where are they going? This isn't possible. A static-filled transmission came through the comms. It was one of the missing soldiers. His voice was shaking. "They're here, but I don't see them." "Who?" Captain Vrektor demanded. "They're there in my mind. I can feel them, but I can't. I can't." Silence. The transmission cut off. Another soldier dropped his weapon, his breath ragged. "Sir," Permission to retreat. I don't, I don't think we should be here. Vector grabbed him by the collar. We are warriors of the Zyphar Dominion. We do not run from shadows. We. Another trooper vanished mid-sentence. Vector floatsa. The air around him felt heavier, like something was watching, waiting, hunting. A new sound echoed through the streets, a whispering wind, carrying something unnatural with it. The buildings that didn't seem right anymore. Walls that had been perfectly intact before now looked cracked and warped. Shadows moved where nothing should be moving. And then the squad saw it. Words carved into the walls of an old building. Fresh, as if written just seconds ago. You should have left us alone. Captain Vector took a step back, his mind racing. This was not normal. This was not possible. Something was playing with them. Something was here. And then, one final transmission crackled over the comms. A human voice. Cold, steady, unshaken. You came for war. But war isn't what you'll find. You'll never see us coming. Then, the last soldier vanished, and Captain Vector was alone. Aboard the Zyphar flagship, Admiral Korr'Vex's war table flickered with emergency transmissions. Admiral, we're losing squads. They're just disappearing. Korr'Vex felt his claws clench. Tell me how. Tell me why. We don't know, Admiral. One moment they report in, the next silence. No bodies. No remains. The war strategist Tyler stepped forward, her usually cold demeanor now showing the slightest hint of unease. This isn't a battlefield, Admiral. It's a graveyard. Korr'Vex glared at the planet below, his unease turning into something far worse. The Zernath had lost to humans because they underestimated them. The Zyphar had not. And yet they were losing anyway. Not because of firepower, not because of military tactics, but because this was not war. This was something else. Something far worse. And then, as Korr'Vex stood frozen in realization, another transmission cut through the silence. The same human voice. Calm. Unshaken. Welcome to our world, Admiral. Now it's your turn to disappear. Admiral Korr'Vex's war fleet, the greatest military force ever assembled, was fading into nothingness. Entire squads missing. Elite soldiers vanishing without a trace. No bodies. No screams. Just silence. And now, the Zyphar command center was unraveling. Korr'Vex stood motionless at his command table, his golden eyes locked onto the holographic war map. Red markers, his troops, were vanishing. One, then another, then entire battalions, all without a single gunshot fired. This was not a war. This was a horror unfolding in real time. And for the first time, Korr'Vex understood. They had walked into a nightmare. Admiral, do you read? A panicked trooper's voice exploded over the war room speakers, filled with static desperation and terror. Korr'Vex snapped to attention. Who is this? Identify yourself. Captain Vector, I'm the only one left. They're gone. All of them. The war room fell silent as the remaining commanders turned toward the transmission, their faces grim. Explain, Captain, Korr'Vex demanded, his voice cold and steady. We entered an abandoned city, but Admiral, it's not abandoned. Then what is it? A trap. Korr'Vex's claws dug into the war table. Who is attacking you? Are they cloaked soldiers? Hidden artillery? Biological warfare? The transmission crackled. Then a whisper came through. No, nothing like that. It's worse. The room stilled. Admiral, we were never fighting humans. They're fighting us from inside our own minds. Then static. The signal cut out, and Captain Vector was gone. Korr'Vex turned sharply toward Tyler, his voice a low growl. Find me answers. Now. Within seconds, the war table lit up with new scans, deep-level thermal imaging, motion tracking, seismic activity detection. A new discovery appeared. A hidden facility, buried beneath the ruins of an old human city. Massive underground chambers. Strange energy readings. They didn't vanish, Dravkor muttered, his mandibles twitching in realization. They were taken. Korr'Vex straightened, his voice dark and unreadable. Send in the Reapers. The Reapers, the Zyphar Dominion's most elite shock troopers. Genetically enhanced, battle-forged, fearless. And now, they were descending into the unknown. Their dropship hovered over the abandoned city, releasing a squad of 20 into the darkened ruins. Helmet lights flickered on. Plasma rifles charged. A massive blast door was found buried under rubble. The Zyphar forced it open, and inside, they found something that made even the Reapers hesitate. A vast underground chamber stretching for miles, dimly lit by flickering red lights. Rows of containment tanks filled the chamber. Inside each tank, something moved, something human. One of the Reapers stepped closer, his visor scanning the sealed glass chambers. Inside, pale-skinned humans floated in thick liquid, their eyes closed, their bodies wrapped in strange biomechanical wires. They weren't dead, but they weren't alive either. "What is this?" one of the Reapers muttered. A holographic display activated nearby, revealing ancient data logs. Project: Sapient Ascension. Status: Initiated. Subjects: 1056. Purpose: Post-human evolution. The Zyphar soldiers exchanged glances, unease creeping into their hardened minds. "Admiral, we found something." Korr'Vex's voice crackled through comms. "Report: Humans on modifia. Experimented on. I think." A loud hiss echoed through the facility. The tanks began draining. The human subjects inside opened their eyes. They were not human anymore. The first humanoid figure stepped from its containment pod. Tall, unnaturally tall, skin flawless, silver-like, muscles woven with something non-biological, eyes burning with unnatural clarity. Then they moved, and no one saw it happen. 1 second, the Reapers were standing in formation, rifles raised. The next, half of them were gone. No gunfire, no screams, just gone. The remaining Reapers panicked, opening fire, but their shots hit nothing. The figures moved through the gunfire like ghosts, too fast to track, too precise to be real. One of the Zyphar warriors gasped, his body jerking violently. He screamed, but it wasn't from pain. It was from something inside his mind. I see them, they're inside me." His armor collapsed to the floor. Empty. His body was gone. The Reapers' desperate transmissions filled the war room, their voices overlapping with static-filled horror. "We can't see them. They're moving inside our heads. It's not telepathy. It's something worse. Please get US out of here." Then silence. The screen flickered. The transmission cut off. Korr'Vex's hands trembled slightly, something that had never happened before. He turned to Tylus R.A. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes held something rare. "Fear. We're not fighting humans anymore, Admiral," she whispered. "We're fighting whatever they became." A new signal came through. A single voice. "Human. Calm. Controlled. You wanted to see what makes us different, Admiral. Now you will." Then, all across the Zyphar fleet, the lights went out. The ships were no longer under their control. The war was no longer theirs to fight. The nightmare had only just begun. Aboard the Zyphar Dominion flagship, chaos erupted. The bridge was no longer a place of command. It was a tomb of flickering lights, silent alarms, and panicked officers scrambling to understand what was happening. Admiral Korr'Vex stood motionless, staring at the war map, which, just minutes ago, had displayed his fleet's overwhelming strength. Now, half of the ships had gone dark. No signals, no crew reports, just silence. His greatest invasion force, the most advanced military in the galaxy, was being systematically erased, and he still didn't know who or what was doing it. "Admiral, we've lost contact with the Reaper squads." The officer's voice was trembling. Zyphar, soldier, never trembled. Korr'Vex's jaw tightened. "Deploy extraction teams. Retrieve whatever survivors are left." The officer hesitated. "Admiral, there are no survivors." Korr'Vex felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. It took him a moment to name it. Dread. From orbit, the Zyphar fleet watched in silence as their forces were swallowed by the ruins below. No gunfire, no explosions, no battles, just soldiers vanishing. It was as if Earth itself had turned against them. "Tylus R.A., Korr'Vex spoke, his voice cold, controlled. "What are we dealing with?" The war strategist didn't respond immediately. Instead, She slowly turned toward him, her eyes glowing dimly in the emergency lights. Admiral, I don't think we're fighting a resistance. Korr'Vex's eyes narrowed. Then what are we fighting? She exhaled sharply. A transformation. Alert. A capital warship has gone dark. The bridge crew froze, turning toward the hollow displays as one of the Zyphar's largest warships simply disappeared from radar. No impact detected. No explosions. Just gone. Korr'Vex felt his throat tighten. How do we lose a dreadnought? The answer came moments later. Another ship vanished. This time they saw it happen. The massive vessel flickered, its metal hull warping, as if it were being pulled out of existence itself. One moment it was there, the next it was erased. Korr'Vex spun toward Dravkor, his mind racing. I want full energy scans of whatever just happened. Now! But the war analyst wasn't listening. He was staring out the bridge window at something far worse. Admiral, we are not alone. For the first time since the invasion began, the Zyphar saw them. Figures emerged from the darkness, standing atop the ruins of Earth cities. Tall, silent, their bodies moving unnaturally. Not human anymore, but something else entirely. Post-human. Their silver-like skin shimmered, their eyes glowing with something beyond mere intelligence. They looked up toward the Zyphar warships, their gaze cold, unreadable. Then, as if answering a silent command, they lifted their hands. Energy surged through the air. A sound, deep, unnatural, vibrated through the planet's atmosphere. And then, the Zyphar fleet began to die. One by one, ships began losing power. Engines flickered, weapons failed, shields collapsed. Crews screamed over comms as unseen forces ripped through their ships. They're inside our systems, a voice roared over the speakers. They're rewriting everything. Our ships are. Silence. The transmission cut off. Another ship vanished from the war map. And then another. And another. The Zyphar weren't just losing the battle. They were being erased from it. Korr'Vex gritted his teeth, his mind calculating a way out. They had miscalculated everything. Humanity wasn't fighting them. They were consuming them, turning their own technology against them. If they stayed, they would be next. Order the retreat, Korr'Vex growled. Silence filled the bridge. Even his war-hardened commanders hesitated. Admiral, we never retreat. Korr'Vex's golden eyes burned. Then we die. All remaining vessels. Initiate emergency FTL jump. Get out of here. The order was sent, but the ships didn't move. Admiral, our jump drives are failing. Korr'Vex's claws tightened. Why? A final transmission came through. The same human voice. Calm, controlled, unstoppable. You should have left us alone. Now you never will. And with that, the FTL drives of every Zyphar ship overloaded, consuming their own fleets from the inside. One by one, the Zyphar ships exploded into void energy, and the invasion fleet was no more. A single ship remained, Korr'Vex's command vessel, adrift, alone, powerless. The human figures on the planet below watched as their final prey remained in orbit. They had let one ship survive. Why? Because they wanted the galaxy to know what had happened here. Korr'Vex staggered back, his mind reeling. This wasn't war. This was a warning. The Zyphar Dominion was finished. Not because they were defeated in battle, but because humanity had become something greater than war itself. Korr'Vex trembled, his voice a whisper. What have you become? The human voice returned, one final time. The last mistake your kind will ever make. The greatest invasion fleet in Zyphar history was gone. Not destroyed, not conquered, erased. Admiral Korr'Vex's command ship was the last vessel left in orbit. He stood alone on his bridge, surrounded by the corpses of his officers, their bodies slumped over consoles that no longer worked. The ship's once glorious systems flickered, barely operational. A few desperate crew members crawled from the wreckage, their expressions vacant, hollow. They had witnessed something beyond war, something beyond understanding, something no species should have ever faced. The fleet was gone, the invasion was over, and humanity had won without ever firing a shot. Korr'Vex felt a chill crawl up his spine as his ship's hollow display flickered to life, filled with static and broken data streams. And then, a signal came through, not from the Zyphar Dominion, from Earth. The same human voice spoke once more, cold, calculated. "Do you understand now, Admiral?" Korr'Vex's mandibles clenched, his throat dry. "What are you?" The human voice did not answer immediately. Then, with terrifying clarity, it spoke. "We were just like you once. Arrogant. Conquerors. But we evolved. Now we're something else." A pause. Then, "And the rest of your dominion will soon learn what happens when you underestimate us. You will deliver that message, won't you, Admiral?" Korr'Vex trembled, something he had never done before. "You let me live on purpose." "Yes." "Why?" "Because we want them to know what's coming." The transmission ended, and Korr'Vex understood. He was not a survivor. He was a warning. Days later, Korr'Vex's damaged vessel limped into Zyphar space, barely operational. He sent no transmission ahead of his arrival. He did not summon his commanders. He simply sat in silence, knowing that the moment his ship docked, his fate was sealed. The Zyphar were not forgiving. They did not accept failure. And he had done more than fail. He had brought ruin to the entire Dominion. The War Council chamber on Zyphar Prime was a monument to dominance. A vast obsidian structure, towering over the capital, built from the remains of species they had conquered. Today it felt smaller. Korr'Vex knelt before the Supreme Chancellor, his body weak, his spirit shattered. The council members loomed above him, their robes flowing like shadows, their eyes glowing with fury. "Your fleet was the most powerful armada in the galaxy. You were supposed to erase a single species. Yet you returned alone, defeated, humiliated." Korr'Vex did not look up. He had no excuses, no explanations that would satisfy them. Finally, the Supreme Chancellor's voice thundered through the chamber. "Who defeated you?" Korr'Vex's mandibles twitched. "Not humans. Not anymore." The council stilled. "Explain." Korr'Vex lifted his head, his golden eyes haunted, distant. "There's something else now. Something beyond us." Silence. Then, Korr'Vex spoke the words that ended an empire. "We should have left them alone." The Zyphar Dominion had existed for millennia. It had never known fear, never known loss, never imagined that a lesser species could be its undoing. But now, the whispers had started. If they destroyed the invasion fleet? What if they come for us next? What if they can't be stopped? The council argued for hours, debating whether to send another fleet, to strike before it was too late. But deep down, they all knew the truth. If we send another fleet, they will do worse than destroy us. They will consume us. They will erase us. For the first time, the Zyphar hesitated. And that was how empires die. Not with war, not with invasion, but with fear. Across the galaxy, the warning spread. An empire had fallen, and the cause was a single species. Then, one day, a new signal appeared across the Zyphar Dominion channels. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a threat. It was a message from Earth, broadcast to every corner of Zyphar space. "You should have left us alone. Now, you never will." And with that, the message ended. No war followed. No retaliation came. Because the Zyphar knew the truth. It was already too late. The fall of the Zyphar Dominion sent shockwaves across the galaxy. No one had expected it. The most feared empire broken. A fleet that could wipe out planets erased. And the ones responsible? A species that was once considered weak. Inferior. Unworthy. Humanity. Now, the galaxy watched in stunned silence. Governments, warlords, federations. Every major power turned their eyes toward Earth. And for the first time in history, they asked themselves the same question. What has humanity become? And are we next? Deep within the Dorelian Federation, the most advanced diplomatic force in the galaxy, an emergency meeting was called. The chamber, a vast, circular arena lined with holographic displays of the greatest civilizations, was filled with hundreds of galactic leaders. They had all gathered for one reason: to discuss the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known: Earth. Among the speakers was Supreme Chancellor Ralvan of the Dorelian Federation, a species that had stood for 10,000 years. His voice trembled as he addressed the Council of Worlds. The Zyphar Dominion was one of the most powerful empires in the known universe, and they have been wiped out, not by an enemy fleet, not by a superior military, but by something we do not understand. The room was silent. Even warlords who had conquered hundreds of planets said nothing. We must ask ourselves a question that none of us ever thought possible. Ralvin took a deep breath. Are we no longer the rulers of the galaxy? The words hung in the air like a death sentence. And for the first time in millennia, the great empires of the galaxy felt fear. The meeting broke into chaos. Some demanded war. Some demanded surrender. Some wanted to hide and never speak of Earth again. We must strike before they strike again, one warlord roared. If we move against them, we will meet the same fate as the Zyphar. Another leader snapped. One of the Tarkith Hive's most powerful queens clicked her mandibles. What if humanity does not wish to conquer? The room went silent again. What if they have no interest in war? What if they only defend themselves? A diplomat from the Merit Coalition, a species known for its hyperintelligence, spoke. That is what terrifies me the most. The others turned to him. He adjusted his hollow displays, showing encrypted Zyphar reports. The Zyphar sent the largest fleet in history to wipe Earth off the galactic map. Humanity did not strike first. They did not fight for conquest. They erased an empire simply because it invaded their world. If they had been the aggressors, we would know by now. Instead, they remained silent. The council members looked at each other. Humanity had every reason to expand, but they hadn't. They hadn't even left their solar system. They were still waiting. And that was the most terrifying part of all. The council voted. Some still wanted to fight. Some wanted to send spies to learn more. But the majority agreed on one thing. No one would touch Earth again. No invasions. No experiments. No attempts at conquest. The galaxy would leave them alone. For now. Because there was one final, unshakable truth. If humans wanted war, they would have already won. As the council came to its decision, something unexpected happened. A signal sent from Earth. Not an attack. Not a declaration of war. A simple message, broadcasted across every galactic channel, in every language, to every species. A single sentence. We are watching. The galaxy remains in stunned silence. No one knows what humanity's next move will be. Will they continue to stay in the shadows? Or will they finally make their presence known? And if they do, will the galaxy be ready? Perhaps the greater question is, will humanity still see the galaxy as an enemy? Or have they already moved far beyond it?